Graveyards are final places of rest, or so we like to believe, but for some time, they're anything but peaceful. The true graveyard horror stories of the chilling sound of footsteps, crunching on gravel when no one's around, shadowy figures moving between headstones, or whispers carried by the wind that calls your name are unsettling. In this video, we step into the graveyard after dark, where the boundary between the living and the dead is thinner than you'd ever want to believe. Stay connected, because things are going to become bone-chilling and horrifying. You don't think much about danger when you work in a graveyard. It's quiet, the dead don't bother you, and most avoid it after sundown. That's why I took the job in the first place. Money for little effort. My shifts were from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and I mostly spent my time patrolling or reading a book in the office. That all changed one night when I met him. I first noticed a man about 3 weeks into the job. He was tall and wiry, with long, matted hair that had not been washed in months. I caught him standing by the east wall near the older graves. When I approached, he darted off into the shadows. Probably homeless, I thought. It's not uncommon for drifters to wander into cemeteries. I decided not to press the issue. The next night, I saw him again. This time he was closer, crouched near the entrance of some crumbled over mausoleum or another. I yelled, "Hey, you can't stay here, it's private property." And he didn't say a word, just stared with these sunken eyes like he was sizing me up. Then he slunk back into the darkness and disappeared among the gravestones. For days afterward, I continued to see him. At times, he'd be sitting on a headstone, and at other times, he'd hang around the fence, always watching. I mentioned this to my supervisor, but he just shrugged it off. "As long as he's not vandalizing anything, leave him be. He's probably just a harmless bum." But he didn't feel harmless. It wasn't until one night, on routine rounds around the mausoleum, I found a pile of old blankets and some empty cans tucked inside it, that it became apparent someone was staying there. I decided to leave a sandwich and a bottle of water, a peace offering, to keep things calm. That was a mistake. The next night, I walked my usual route and noticed a fresh bouquet on one of the graves. At first, I thought a family member had visited during the day, but then I saw the note tucked under the ribbon. It wasn't a tribute, it was a warning. "Stay out of my home." My stomach turned. I wanted to leave, but I couldn't abandon my post. Instead, I called the police. By the time they arrived, the flowers were gone. They searched the grounds but found nothing. The officer told me to stay vigilant and call again if anything seemed suspicious. That night, I didn't feel like reading. I locked myself in the office, the only room with a solid door, and waited for my shift to end. Around 3 a.m., I heard a faint tapping on the window. My heart sank. I turned off the light and crept toward the glass. There he was, pressed against the pane, grinning. His teeth were yellow and jagged, his eyes wild and bloodshot. I froze, praying he couldn't see me in the dark. Then he spoke. "You shouldn't have touched my things." I took my phone once again and called the police. As I turned towards the window again, he was gone. The officers came after 30 minutes, but they still found nothing. Still, this time, they all acted if things seemed grave. They told me to take some time off. I didn't require being told that. I quit the following day. A week later, I heard from a coworker who said they found signs that someone had been living in the mausoleum for months. Scrap food, makeshift bedding, and a knife. Sometimes, I wonder what would have happened if I stayed that night, but I try not to think about it too much. After all, some things are better left buried. It started as a peaceful afternoon, just me and my camera. For months, I've been working on a project documenting old gravestones for a local historical society. Graveyards don't bother me. Most people find them creepy, but I've always considered them quiet, almost calming. That changed on this particular day. It was one of those places hidden away at the edge of a tiny town, surrounded by tall oaks and dense underbrush. It had seen better days. Headstones were chipped, some toppled, and weeds clotted everything. Perfect for atmospheric shots, it was. I strolled by the rows of weathered markers, snapping pictures and noting details. At about 4 p.m., when the lights began to soften, I noticed an ancient tree at the edge of the property. Its thick roots coiled over an unmarked piece of dirt, and I was curious. I walked over. That was when I saw the shallow pit, maybe 3 feet across. It looked freshly dug, the dirt still loose and damp. I assumed it was a grave in preparation for burial, but something about it felt off. There were no markers, no discarded tools, just the hole. I leaned closer, and a piece of fabric stuck out of the dirt darker, crusted with something that looked like blood. My chest tightened. Reaching down with shaking hands, I pulled it free. It was part of a torn t-shirt, the edges frayed, the stain unmistakable. My body had every instinct to run away. Then I saw something else, a small but unmistakably human bone protruding from the dirt. My stomach quivered. I reached for my phone and dialed 911, keeping my voice steady while explaining what I found. The operator assured me someone would be sent. Reluctantly, I stepped back and took a photo of the pit for proof. Minutes crawled like hours. Every rustle of leaves made me jump. I kept turning around, half expecting someone to materialize. And then, someone did. A tall, wiry man stepped out from the woods. He had a baseball cap pulled low over his face and a shovel slung over his shoulder. He was dirty all over his clothes, and his cold and heavy eyes met mine. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice sharp. I froze, clutching my camera like a shield. I'm with the Historical Society. I'm just taking pictures." He looked at the hole, then back at me. "You shouldn't be here." Before I could answer, he strode past me, digging the shovel into the ground. I stood there, shocked, as he began filling the hole. My heart was pounding so loud I thought he could hear it. "You didn't see anything," he said, not looking up. I took a step backward, nodding slowly, muttering something. I took off in the direction from where I had just come. Just as I reached a safe distance, he growled under his breath, "Nosy people wind up here too." Well, that did it. I stumbled over the roots and the stones, and not wanting to, I kept turning back, hoping he would not pursue me. My car was parked on the opposite side of the cemetery. I didn't stop running until I reached it. I sat there shaking, trying to collect myself. In about 10 minutes, the police showed up, and I flagged them off, pointing them toward the tree. They searched, but once they reached the spot, the hole was gone, filled in. There was no suspicion on the officer's part. No blood, no bone, just freshly packed dirt. They said that it was some kind of misunderstanding and that I needed to go home. But I know what I saw, and I know that man saw me too. For weeks afterward, I felt like I was being watched. There'd be some car parking near my apartment that I didn't recognize, and footsteps outside my window at night. I never went into graveyards again. I still wonder what might have been in that hole and how close I came to it. It was a dumb dare. My friend Kyle swore he'd seen a dug-up grave in the old Harper Cemetery last week, taking a shortcut home. Naturally, none of us believed him, so we checked it out. It was supposed to be harmless fun, just a group of friends sneaking into a graveyard after dark to prove him wrong. We arrived just past midnight, flashlights cutting through the darkness. The cemetery was overgrown, with weeds spilling onto crumbling pathways. Most headstones were faded, with names and dates barely legible. It felt like we were stepping into a forgotten corner of history. "Over here," Kyle whispered, leading us toward a cluster of headstones. The grave was near a crooked oak tree at the far end. Sure enough, when we got there, the ground was disturbed. Dirt was piled on either side of the grave, and the casket inside was visible, its lid partially cracked open. "Holy crap, you weren't kidding," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think somebody was digging it up?" Jess asked, clenching my arm. "Looks fresh," Kyle muttered, prodding the dirt with his foot. "But why would anybody stop halfway?" Before I could answer, we heard a low hum, mechanical sound, faint but distinct. We froze, exchanging wide-eyed glances. The sound grew louder, and then a dim light appeared in the distance. Someone was coming. "Turn off your flashlights," I hissed. We ducked behind the nearest headstone, hearts pounding, as a white van slowly rolled into view. It pulled to a stop about 20 yards from us, its headlights casting long, eerie shadows across the gravestones. Two men climbed out, both in dark clothes and gloves. One of them opened the back of the van, revealing what looked like a body bag. "What the hell are they doing?" Jess whispered, her voice shaking. They transferred the bag to the open grave and let it fall. Then, naturally, they started filling up the hole with dirt again. Kyle gestured for us to be quiet, but I felt the panic welling in my chest. Those had not been any normal groundskeepers. They were grave robbers, or worse. Jess yanked my sleeve. "We've got to go," she mouthed. I nodded, hand motioning towards the darkness as if suggesting they should fall in behind me. Keeping as low and out of sight as possible, we continued down the slow-moving chain until we almost reached the periphery of the cemetery. Then Jess slipped, catching herself on a broken headstone. The echo from it went echoing through the quiet night of ours. "Hey!" I turned to see them staring right at us, shovels in hand. "Run!" I yelled. We sprinted, dodging through headstones as the men gave chase. My heart pounded in my chest, my legs scorched with every step. I never dared to look back. The cemetery was endless, a maze of graves and twisted paths. Finally, we broke through the tree line and into the woods beyond. The sound of footsteps behind us grew fainter, but I didn't stop running until we reached the road. We flagged down the first car that came along and called the police. The van and the men were gone by the time they arrived, but the grave was filled. The police didn't seem particularly surprised. They told me grave robbing was rare, but not unheard of, especially in abandoned cemeteries. They promised to look into it, but I couldn't shake the feeling the men had gotten away with something far worse than theft. To this day, I have no idea what was in the bag or why they were so desperate to bury it, but every time I pass Harper Cemetery, a chill runs down my spine. Some things are better left undisturbed. Graveyard work isn't the prettiest, but it pays the bills. My shifts were generally uneventful. Fixing fallen headstones, clearing brush, and the occasional burial preparation are all I typically do. That's why when I heard the knocking, I froze. It was late afternoon and the sun cast long shadows between rows of old graves. I was straightening a headstone that had toppled in last week's storm when I heard a faint, rhythmic knocking. At first, I thought it was some sort of woodpecker in the nearby trees. Then it stopped, only to start again, louder. It came from the mausoleum. It was an ancient building, its stone facade cracked and overgrown with moss. I'd always hated working near it. Something about its yawning iron door and the way the light seemed to dim near it gave me the creeps. Still, I told myself it was probably an animal stuck inside. "Hello!" My voice echoed as I pushed the door open. Inside, the air was stale and damp. The marble shelves inside lined rows of decayed coffins, their brass handles dulled with age. The knocking had stopped. I was just about to leave when my foot hit something hollow. The floor shifted slightly beneath me. Curious, I knelt and found a small square outline in the stone, a hidden hatch. My heart pounded as I pried it open with my crowbar. The hatch revealed a narrow ladder leading to darkness. Despite better judgment, I climbed down, using my phone as a flashlight. The air grew colder with each step, and the smell, metallic like blood, grew more vigorous. When I reached the bottom, I found myself in a cramped makeshift bunker. A cot against the wall was covered in grubby blankets. Canned foods, a rusty knife, and an old Polaroid camera sat on a nearby table. My flashlight illuminated the far corner as my stomach churned. A mannequin sat huddled up in a chair until a face came into view. A mask, very human, yet disturbingly so realistic. I moved back but tripped over something heavy. Looking down, saw a wood coffin with the lid ajar. Inside was a watch, some pictures, and a pair of shoes. They belonged to different people. They were all trophies. That's when I heard scratching sounds above me. The hatch slammed shut. I froze, my heart hammering. Then the voice came. "You shouldn't have come down here." I whipped my flashlight toward the ladder and found a man standing there, his face hidden in the shadows. His voice was calm, almost pleasant. "I usually don't get visitors. Guess you found my little hobby." I dove for the ladder, pushing past him. He grabbed me, but I swung my crowbar wildly, connecting with his arm. He screamed in pain as I scrambled out of the mausoleum, running as fast as my legs could carry me. I called the police, but the bunker had been cleaned out by the time they arrived. No man, no mannequin, no trophies. There was only the coffin, which is now closed. I quit the next day. It was supposed to be a day hike, but we became lost when we wandered off the trail to chase the sunset. The dense forest swallowed us, and the dusk had fallen when we realized we were hopelessly turned around. It wasn't long before we stumbled into a clearing, a forgotten graveyard surrounded by leaning iron fences and overgrown weeds. "This is creepy," Jenna whispered, clutching my arm. "No kidding," I muttered. The gravestones were cracked, many of them illegible. A few were toppled, moss creeping up their surfaces. The place reeked of abandonment. We wandered cautiously, hoping the clearing would signal our way back. Then Jenna pointed to an odd patch of dirt, darker and looser than the surrounding ground. An unmarked grave. "Looks fresh," she said, voice shaking. "Probably an animal," I said, but even I wasn't convinced. Something didn't feel right. Curiosity overcame us. Jenna picked up a stick lying nearby and poked at the dirt. I was hesitant, but soon joined in, scraping off the top layer with my hands. That's when we saw it. Fabric. A torn piece of cloth stained with dark, reddish-brown spots. "Stop," I said sharply, panic bubbling up. Jenna froze. "What do we do?" "We called the police," I said, digging my phone out. "No service." "Of course not." We heard it before developing a new game plan. The crunch of gravel beneath tires. Headlights slit through the trees, drawing near slowly. A beat-up pickup truck pulled up at the edge of the clearing, its engine growling like an animal that growled in the dark. "Stay still," I whispered, though my heart was hammering. The driver stepped out. He was a tall man wearing a baseball cap and work gloves. He spotted us immediately, his face hardening. "What are you two doing here?" he barked, his tone sharp and accusing. We got lost," Jenna stammered, standing. We were just—" "You shouldn't be here," he snapped, cutting her off. I did too, trying to stay between Jenna and the man. "We didn't mean to trespass. We'll leave." His eyes flicked to the disturbed dirt behind us, and his expression darkened. "What did you touch?" "Nothing," I lied. The man stepped closer, his posture stiff, predatory. My stomach churned as I noticed a shovel in the bed of his truck, and something long and lumpy wrapped in a tarp. "Get in the truck," he said, his voice low and menacing. "No," I said, my voice firm, even though I was shaking. He lunged toward us. Jenna screamed, and we sprinted into the woods, running as fast as possible through the dark. Scrabbling branches scratched at my face, and the sound of heavy footsteps and snapping twigs closed in behind us. Finally, we saw a road, waved down a passing car, and dialed the police. When he was gone, they searched the unmarked grave, and the truck was gone. All that remained was the faint impression of tire tracks, a chilling reminder that someone had buried their secrets deep, and we had been standing too close to uncovering them. These stories have made people question what lingers in the places where the dead are supposed to sleep. For those who felt a presence, heard a voice, or seen something unexplainable, the truth is undeniable. Not everything in the cemetery stays buried. If you ever go to the graveyard, remember that what waits in the graveyard doesn't always stay there, and sometimes it follows you home. If you enjoyed the video, then like and subscribe to the channel for more interesting horror stories. Thanks for watching.